It was Freddie, Sam, Corey, Eric, Philando, Ahmad, Steven, Kenneth, Amadou, Jonathan, Christian, Terrace, Sean. Killed him a day before his wedding. Jamal killed him while he was in handcuffs. Mike killed him while he had his hands up. Kamani with Molly, Philip, Alton. About 3 Kevins, about 2 Jordans. John, Laquan, Bathon, Stephon, Tony, Tamir, Elijah, Antoine, Isel, Terrell, Dondre, Akai, George. For him, set the country on fire. Timothy, Patrick, Paul, Tyree, Quintonio, Darius, Jeremy, William, Anthony, Dante, Oscar, Kendrick, Keith, David, Walter, women like Sandra, Betty, Rihanna, India, Michelle, Tatiana, Tanisha, Rika, Natasha, Palmer, Jen, Megan, baby Ayana. All that we lost, your name live on. Wasn't killed by a cop, but I can't forget Trayvon. Can't forget Emmett, and all of those we lost to the beast. No justice, no peace.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Samuel, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer here at Kansas State University. I'd like to officially welcome all of you to the first in a series of community action talks where we will speak candidly and directly about the phenomena Black Lives Matter. Before we do, I invite our President, General Richard Myers, to say a few words.
Well, good afternoon, K-Staters. Brian, let me thank you and the team for coming up with this particular format. I think we're going to see it's a popular format throughout the year, and I appreciate everybody's participation, particularly our panel today. We've got a great panel. I hope that we'll be able to answer questions and tell you what's happening around here. But this is important that we have our first CATS talk around Black Lives Matter. That was a pretty powerful video at the front. Certainly Black lives do matter, and we're in a situation in our country where it's never been more evident. We're also in a situation where hopefully some things will change. It looks like they're going to change. Just how much they're going to change, I guess we'll have to wait and see. It looks like the Supreme Court decision on DACA students today, overturning the president's executive order, was really good. It's good for DACA students for sure. It's good for our university, all universities. And then just before that, the Supreme Court decision on sex discrimination, I think was great for the LGBTQ community. I think it reminds us that our Constitution was put together by some pretty wise folks who have these 3 branches of government that share and balance each other, share power. And so when one branch gets a little bit off track, one of the other 2 branches can usually bring it back on track. So I just want to acknowledge the fact that we've had 2 decisions here recently, I think, that are really good for America and good for us here in Manhattan, Kansas. So again, this is an important first step. Brian's organized this one, I think, with some help from lots of others, and they can talk about that. But I think this is a great first step as we try to deal with the issue of social injustice, particularly around Black lives and Black Lives Matter. This should be a really good discussion, and I look forward to it. So with that, Brian, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, President Myers. Today we'll have, as I mentioned earlier, some brief, delicate and candid conversation around the phenomena of Black Lives Matter. We will have a series of questions posed to our panelists who are here today with us. And we will also take questions from the participants who are participating through the YouTube live stream. We ask that all of our colleagues and students and community members who are participating in this dialogue do so with civility and dignity and respect for the value and diversity of opinions that may be represented here today. The issue of injustice and taking the lives of Black men and women is not a new issue. It has been around since the beginning of time, particularly looking at the institution of slavery and henceforth. However, in February of 2012, a young man of 17 years old went to a convenience store to purchase a pack of Skittles. And on his return home, he was accosted by a neighborhood watch patrol coordinator who did not recognize him as a member of a resident of that particular community, who did not see him as a human being, and threatened and ultimately ended that young man's life. That young man was Mr. Trayvon Martin. Trayvon's killer, Mr. George Zimmerman, was not convicted of the crime due to the Florida Stand Your Ground laws. Since then, there has been an explosion of concerns throughout our country where institutions or police departments and city governments and townships and the like have refused to consider the human value of Black lives and charge and arrest and convict police officers and others who take the lives of Black citizens who are unarmed, who are non-threatening, who have committed no crime and done nothing to deserve the taking of their lives. That phenomenon gave way to what we now know as the Black Lives Matter social movement. And today we are joined by a number of scholars and practitioners and students to discuss this matter a little more fully. We have with us Dr. Shireen Rashamravan, Associate Professor in American Ethnic Studies. We also have Dr. Kevin Steinmetz, Associate Professor in Sociology, Anthropology, and Social Work. We are joined by the Chief of Police and Assistant Vice President for University Police, Mr. Ronnie Grice. And we are joined by a native Minneapolis, Mr. Trumaine Lindsay, who is our Director of Diversity and Multicultural Student Affairs. And we are joined by Ms. Brenda Hurd, a junior political science major from Powder Springs, Georgia. We will begin our questions with Dr. Shireen. And as I said earlier, please feel free to connect with any questions or follow-up thoughts that you may have in the chat. Dr. Shireen, this first question is for you. Black men and women have been shot and killed by police at a disproportionate rate. Since 2015, they have been killed at 30.1 per 10 million, compared to 10.7 per 10 million for Hispanics and 7.1 per 10 million for white. With Black Lives Matter movement, video recordings, and etc., why haven't we seen a greater reduction in the use of deadly force in the Black community?
Well, thanks for having me today, and I'm grateful to be part of this panel. Before I answer the question, I do want to say that most of what the perspectives and knowledges I'm going to be using to respond to questions today are based on what I've learned from Black scholars and activists like Barbara Ransby, Ruthie Wilson-Gilmore, Mariam Kaba. These are people that I think all of us would do well to learn from, to listen to, and to read. It's the folks who are doing this work on the ground. So in response to your question, which I actually think your question points us in a very particular direction. You know, why, despite the movement for Black Lives and despite the circulation of video displaying the brutalities and the murders of unarmed Black people by law enforcement, have the numbers, the disproportionate killings not decreased? And I want to point out that the movement for Black Lives is part of a legacy of centuries of freedom fighting led by Black folks. And so this is a manifestation of work for centuries and a mirror being held up to us to ask ourselves, you know, why nevertheless do we continue to see this level of systemic murder of unarmed Black folks, particularly by police who have the charge to quote unquote protect and serve the public? And so I think if we take that statistic that you used, we have to go back to thinking about the foundations of our nation and how anti-Blackness has served the beginnings of what has come to be known as America. And how is it that the slave codes that were used to keep enslaved Black peoples in this nation working for the profit building of propertied white people, how did those become the basis for penal codes and the criminal justice system that continues to this day with its own policies and different rhetoric? And nevertheless, what we see is while the Black codes that were based on the slave codes were used to recuperate in many ways the stolen labor of Black peoples. And so there was a profit motive to the penal code, but there was also part of that profit motive was to criminalize Blackness, so that the public that is supposed to be protected and served by policing is also simultaneously taught a common sense fear or understanding that Blackness is something that needs to be disciplined, that is suspect and needs hyper surveillance by law enforcement. And while we have indeed, because of the work of Black movements for freedom, we have seen progress. What you're seeing, I think, today with the movement for Black Lives and the demands to defund the police, which I know might come up later, I think is a real call for a reckoning with the statistic you mentioned, which is what is going on with the ways that policing continues to be done. It's not decreasing the numbers. And what are other ways to reduce harm, to stop harm, that are going to be more effective for Black lives, for sure. But in doing that, possibly making it harm reduction and prevention possible in much more effective ways across all demographics. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. And we will cover some of those issues that you pointed out with Dr. Steinmetz momentarily. I would like to follow up, if I could, based on your response there. Police shoot and kill 1,000 people each year. And since 2015, nationwide, there has been 5,400 people killed or shot by police. Despite protests and social media movements like Black Lives Matter, the number killed each year has remained steady. 496 of those 1,000 per year have been Black men and women. Why is the prevalence of these killings so high in the Black community?
So my answer to this is related to the answer I gave earlier, but with what I'd like to add to that is one of the things that isn't talked about enough, I think, in some of the public conversations. Again, this is wisdom and knowledge I've learned from reading Black scholars and activists like Ruthie Wilson Gilmore and Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor and Angela Davis. Is that when we think about what constitutes crime and why we have high crime areas, that we think about, how have institutions that are supposed to help us live the lives that we want to live, things we think of as public resources, actively been abandoning particular communities, like educational resources, like healthcare resources, like economic opportunities that provide a living wage, and so on. And so when we think about how policies are set up to, again, police and protect us and zero in on where harms are, I think we also have to think about what kinds of abandonment of particular communities have created spaces where people's survival sometimes is locked into means that we tend to label as high crime areas. And so I think we have to think about, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore calls this organized abandonment. And then and the response to things like, lack of resources is to discipline and punish. But also then we have police perhaps going into places again with some of these lenses that are training them to think of suspicion perhaps, and to respond in a way that whatever is going on in these particular places, policing isn't necessarily going to be the answer. And so and I don't want to speak too much to this. I think there's other people on this panel that can perhaps say more about this, but I think that the statistics are pointing to the same old as not offering the kinds of solutions that we need to address the systemic violence that we're seeing. And that at the end of the day, we have to grapple with internalized anti-Blackness.
I agree. And it's almost as if Blackness has been criminalized in some ways. And regular actions and activities of simply walking or jogging or bird watching or other things that have not fractured any state statutes or annotated codes of our state or nation have been used as justification for confronting these men and women for practically no reason in many cases. I want to turn now to Mr. Lindsay. Mr. Lindsay is our Director of Diversity and Multicultural Student Affairs here at Kansas State University. He is a native Minneapolis and has been very familiar with the cultural fabric of the epicenter of this social movement that we are seeing now. Tremaine, I want to ask you particularly about the thoughts around culpability. Some people argue that white lives matter and all lives matter. Tell us, if you would please, what is it that makes Black Lives Matter not be an affront to other populations and other demographics?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Samuel, for having me on here. When you look at the term and the phrase and the hashtag Black Lives Matter, it really is a cry for help. It's a call for help. It's a call to say, stop killing us. We have to go back to the very fabric of this country. Aside from our indigenous and native brothers and sisters that were here on this land, Black people, Africans were the only people that were brought here without willingly coming. And so from the very moment that they were brought to this country and the way that this country was developed in the fabric of the United States, Black people have never been considered human. We've been dehumanized, criminalized, as you all have just said. There's a point in time where representation in Congress, we are considered 3/5 of a man. And so we're not seen as a whole person. And that Black Lives Matter is not to say that no one else faces injustices. It's not to say that no one else are victims of police brutality. But when we look at the percentage of the population of Black Americans here in the United States, and those that fall victim to these injustices, these systemic injustices, we are disproportionately represented at a higher rate. And so it's that cry for help to say, hey, we are people too. Stop killing us. We don't want to see racism. We don't want to experience it. And it's something, unfortunately, that every day that I wake up as a Black man or other Black men and women, that we have to endure the moment that we wake up and step out of our homes. Again, that's not to minimize what happens within other communities. It's just what we see, what we experience. And it's a cry and a call out for help to say, stop it. It's not right. And we want other people, we want allies to join in, because, Black people have been experiencing this all of our lives. And that allyship is what's important. And so as we want people to proclaim Black Lives Matter, we want the country to declare that we see what's happening, that we see what's going on, and that it's not right, that it's not fair. So again, you look at the very fabric of the country and how Africans and Blacks have been treated from the very moment that we've gotten here to the United States. It continues today. It takes on various forms as time has gone on. When you look at police, and yes, they're they've been charged with to protect and serve, but look at the history of police and how the police force, how policing originated. It was originated, as a form of capturing escaped slaves, and so that mindset and that mentality continued on. That systemic oppression continued on even to today. So though it has that protect and serve, to be honest, it was never designed to protect and serve, people of color, minorities, specifically Black people, from the very beginning. And we're tired of it. It's exhausting to have to wake up every day and not know if you're going to make it back home. No one else really has to think about that on a regular, consistent basis, to walk out of your house and for family members to say, hey, can you please make it back home? Can you do everything in your power to come back home? Or, many other racial and ethnic groups don't have to have the conversations with their children, especially their young boys. I have a 5-year-old boy who, he's becoming of age where I have to have certain conversations, but, a lot of Black parents have to have the conversations with their Black children of how to interact with police. No one else has that concern. No one else has to have those conversations of what to do and what not to do to make sure that you are not killed or that you don't fall victim. Another statistic. Black Lives Matter, as many of you have saw the video right at the very beginning of this panel today, of those lives that were taken. It doesn't matter if certain individuals had a criminal record in the past. It's what matters is how was their life taken in that particular point in time, in that moment, whether they committed a crime, whether they were armed, whether they were unarmed. We know that many other individuals of other racial and ethnic backgrounds are afforded the opportunity to be able to go through the court system. And that's why we say Black Lives Matter, because we want to have that same opportunity to go through the court system to either be proven innocent or proven guilty if the crime fits. We just want to be able to essentially, we want to be able to make it to court and not be killed for the color of our skin because we're seen as being aggressive from the very beginning.
My apologies. I want to stay with this theme here for a brief moment and ask you specifically about Minneapolis, the epicenter for the social unrest and the movement that we are all experiencing and living with today. According to numerous sources, excessive force by police officers occurs 7 times more often in Minneapolis. And you remember certainly some of the names, right? Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, and now more recently, George Floyd, okay? What is it, could you tell us, if you can, what are your thoughts on why this happens so frequently in that metropolitan area?
Yeah, I'm going to give you 2 things. I'm going to say no accountability and conditioning. I'm going to start with the conditioning portion. Again, from the very moment that Black people have arrived in this country, they've been conditioned. Society has conditioned and continues to condition them as violent criminals, thugs. That's the perception that's painted. We could look at not even just in Minneapolis, but in other areas to where, for example, you think of the Terrence Crutcher case, where he was unarmed outside of his vehicle, and you can hear the police officer say he looks like a bad dude, right? Studies show that when we look at our educational system, When we look at the teachers, teachers who teach our children are predominantly white women. And studies show that by the age of 5, Black boys are now viewed as a potential threat. They cause that fight or flight mentality within our teachers in the educational system, and they are more um, they receive more discipline, excessive discipline for their behaviors, even though they can be the same exact behaviors as any other student. So at the age of 5, like I said, before a few minutes ago, I have a 5-year-old son. So when he enters into kindergarten this year, I know that certain behaviors that are common for a 5-year-old kid, that's a natural behavior, may be perceived as threatening, or he's going to be subjected to excessive discipline for being a kid, for being a curious 5-year-old boy, that every behaviors that every boy exhibits. And so when you have that at an early age, society is conditioned to view Black men as a threat, or Black people as a threat. Minneapolis, when you look at the demographics, 20% of the population is going to be Black, right? Roughly 20% of the population is Black. 60% of police brutality, acts of violence against citizens are against Black people. So it is very common. It is not a myth. It is a very real reality, and it comes to, like I said, being conditioned as time goes on, but 2, no accountability. When you have situations where someone was murdered on the street in front of people, witnesses, cameras, facts and things like that just don't add up, but there's no accountability for those actions, people will continue to exhibit the same behaviors, right? All of us, have been a child at one particular point in time. And if you did something as a child and you got away with it, then it kind of gives you the notion to say, well, maybe I can do it again. Maybe I'll continue to do it until I receive some discipline for it, until I get caught and there's consequences. So there has to be accountability and consequences. We talk about defunding police. That may or may not be the best way, but I definitely believe in accountability. I'm going to share something that was actually shared with me. I was having a conversation with a police director, and we were talking about accreditation for police force in Minneapolis. The Minneapolis Police Department, as well as a lot of other police departments within the state of Minnesota, are not accredited. And you look at me and you say, well, what does accreditation have to do with anything? For higher education, you have to be accredited, right? You want to make sure that you abide by the rules, the policies, and you're offering the service that you say that you're offering for students to be able to graduate. So there's accreditation in those. There's accreditation in the health field. Why aren't we having it mandatory that all police departments be accredited? But something that's interesting is that when that conversation was approached with some individuals within the Minneapolis Police Department about the accreditation, it was refuted that we're not going to do it because some of our practices or legislation, things that we have on the books when it comes to excessive force, would not allow for us to meet the accreditation requirements. And that's troubling to me, to where here's a system that will help hold you accountable, and these are the standards that are set that we know will decrease the numbers, but yet you willingly acknowledge our practices will not allow for us to meet those requirements. And so it shows that there's a system in place that we're comfortable with and we don't want to change. And when I say we, I'm talking about the police, that particular police department, where you just don't want to change because you're comfortable with the way that things are, because there has not been any consequences for the actions. And so, again, it goes back to how society has been conditioned to view Black people, as well as the no accountability.
It's interesting you say that. I'm reminded, I have a criminal justice background. My bachelor's of science was in criminal justice. And I was told when I was studying the subject in 1990s, that the prisons were built based on the percentages of students who could read at a certain grade level as early as third and fourth grade. So when you make that correlation there, I find that very, very interesting. I also find it interesting when we think about accountability metrics and accreditation and other things that will in many ways curtail some of these bad acts and behaviors on the part of officers who have been sworn to protect and serve. I want to turn now, if we could, to our student representative, Miss Brenda Hurd, who is from Powder Springs, Georgia, and a political science major here at K-State, a junior. And I would like to ask you, as we think about all of these things that are taking place today, I understand that you have received phone calls from classmates and peers apologizing to you about some of the terror and policing mishaps and things that have taken place, as well as systemic racism and any impact it has caused upon you. Give us your perception and your feelings about those calls, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So for my white peers, I have been dealing with racism for years, ever since I was 4 years old, walking home from kindergarten with my sisters. I am Black, I am dark-skinned, and this is not new to me. I recognize the racism in the classroom when we're discussing race, and all eyes come to me as the only colored student in the room. I recognize racism when a white student talks over me in a meeting and just ignores that I have something to say, or that my opinion doesn't have any value because I am a different colored student in the room. I recognize racism when I am walking on campus, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to see somebody that looks like me. So I choose to move forward with this and educate those, my white peers, who are calling me and emailing me, texting me with their apologies. I'm not moved by those very much because honestly, I feel as if they've seen this stuff happening before. This isn't anything new to anyone, and they chose to ignore it or just not speak up about it. And now all of a sudden they're sending their apologies, trying to, I guess, make themselves feel a little better about the situation. That's how it comes across sometimes. I appreciate that they're announcing their solidarity. However, the fact that a Black person has to lose their life makes that solidarity questionable. So I feel like their apology would be more appreciated if we saw action instead of them just giving us those empty apologies. So hopefully the apology will be the change behavior. I hope to see those actions changed in the future, so that way we're not having this situation or having to have these meetings.
I hear you and understand you to say demonstrating that concern and demonstrating the passion, the sympathy, the empathy, and other affects is more important in these times as opposed to simply calling someone after the fact. So living the example and the charge and the change that we would like to see. This is a very interesting time for students all across the country. They are dealing with two pandemics, right? Two battering phenomena that are working and pulling at the psyche of students. First being certainly COVID-19 and some of the disparity in the deaths and things of that nature in the Black or African American population, as we understand it. We won't get into that very much today because the COVID-19 is the topic of our next community action talks. But then there's also the Black Lives Matter that is equally stressing the minds of students across the country. And even in these times of the social unrest and the movement and the killing of Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis, there have been other killings since then that were also caught on tape, and more specifically in Atlanta, Georgia, the killing of Mr. Rayshard Brooks. So if you would please tell us a little bit about your emotions and perceptions and things as you are a student at Kansas State University dealing with both of those issues simultaneously.
Well, as a student, first, I'd like to say it's a lot. It's a lot for adults who aren't students. So for me, I'm angry, I'm confused, I'm annoyed. I'm a little afraid because I feel as if K-State's administration isn't taking the correct, the time to address Black Lives Matters like they have the COVID-19 pandemics. So with that being said, we're going back to a racially charged campus with very little support. I'm annoyed, and I feel as if they're choosing money over safety of their students, in particular, like when we had the America's First Student incident last semester with the white nationalist group on campus that has yet to been removed because of freedom of speech. So with that, we have COVID-19 increasing, the cases rising, and I feel as if the only reason that we're opening back up is because the economy crashed and K-State is in need of our dollars, our Black dollars, white dollars, all dollars. So I am returning for my education because that is what is important to me, but I would also like to have that support for your students of color, and not just these, we hear you, we see you type of statements. So I feel like the action needs to be there as well.
Thank you. And we are certainly exploring many strategies and initiatives that will address some of those issues and concerns. And hopefully our plan is before students return, we'll have a good idea about what some of those changes or new things may be as it relates to addressing some of those concerns. Dr. Steinmetz, if I could ask you a question. Several comments have been made, individuals like myself, other faculty and staff from the university, as well as diversity practitioners here at K-State, have participated in a number of town halls, community action talks, and things of that nature. And we have been told by many, including one of the attorneys for one of the officers in Minneapolis, that the bystanders are to blame for these issues, particularly when you think about video recorded incidents and in some cases not intervening on behalf of victims such as Mr. Floyd. In one particular session that I was in, a police captain here in the state of Kansas said that the cell phones, particularly the videos that come from cell phone cameras, are the #1 enemy of law enforcement officers. So I want to ask you, is this phenomenon more appropriately characterized as a failure of law enforcement or a failure to follow police directives?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I really appreciate it. I also appreciate the thoughtful commentary of all my colleagues before me. This particular issue is, honestly, I can't get behind the characterizations that somehow the people, sorry, I need to turn my volume down for some reason, that the people involved who are filming these things are somehow to blame for the police violence or somehow to blame for really any of this. So like, let's say for instance, that if somebody were to have intervened in the case of Mr. Floyd, that they were to step in and remove his knee from this person's neck. On the one hand, that could have saved Mr. Floyd's life. On the other hand, it would have also likely gotten them arrested, charged with obstruction of justice, best case scenario, or with assaulting an officer, or with potentially having excessive force used on them as well. So in these types of cases, if people, want to hold the police accountable, really the only tool at their disposal is filming them. Further, I mean, we hold law enforcement up to that standard that they're supposed to be the ones acting with some sense of reservation. They're supposed to be the ones who control themselves. And if being filmed by people as bystanders somehow enrages them or sends them into, if I'm following your question correctly, somehow makes them act excessively, that shouldn't fall on the bystanders. That should fall on law enforcement, because we're supposed to be holding them to that higher standard. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If
Brian?
I want to stay with that particular stream, all across the nation, there's a call for police reform, including but not limited to defunding, dismantling, and overhauling police departments. What concerns, if any, are there for defunding police departments, and how will changes in practices such as shootings and chokeholds and other things, such as formally charging officers that use excessive force, bring about systemic change?
So with the first part of your question, what concerns, if there are any, for defunding the police? It really depends on how it's done. If people just yank funding from police departments and expect them to do the exact same thing they were doing before, it will probably cause some issues. But most of the time when we talk about defunding the police, we're also talking about limiting the scope of responsibility that the police hold. So limit the resources, but also assign various duties to other types of social services and community groups. So like, for example, have somebody else respond to traffic accidents, or have somebody else respond to mental health crisis calls, social workers and the like. Because over the past 30, 40 years, we have increasingly increased the scope of what we expect law enforcement to do. It seems like every social problem we say is a criminal justice problem, when we could hand it off to other people. And that's really what defund the police in a lot of ways is about. So if we do it that way, I think the concerns are going to be relatively limited. But it also depends on how police departments and officers respond to defunding the police. For instance, after the Ferguson riots and protests, there was people who were saying that the police were engaging in what's called depolicing. They were basically calling in sick, or not doing their jobs, or not responding to calls. We're starting to see reports of that coming out of Atlanta after the officer had charges filed against him. And really, when people say, well, they'll start depolicing, that could be a potential issue for us, because it might make crime rates go up or whatever. When in actuality, depolicing probably doesn't happen as much as people think, and probably doesn't have that as big an effect on crime rates as most people might think. But again, it just depends on how law enforcement responds to it. If they get defiant, we might see more issues. And if people are, one of the arguments I see about defunding the police, and I apologize, I teach on this subject regularly, so I can ramble, so cut me off if you need to. People will argue that crime rates will go up if we don't have as many police officers on the streets. And while intuitively that might make sense for some, really, while the police can provide a valuable service in regards to reacting to and investigating crimes, their ability to actually prevent crimes is relatively limited, particularly if we're talking about through deterrence. While certain types of police programs, like certain focused deterrence strategies, may have a limited impact, the evidence that police impact crime rates is weak to mixed at best. For the second part, so in short, my concerns are relatively limited about defunding. Now, the second part, how will changes in practices such as shootings, chokeholds, and the like bring about systemic change? I'm very dubious about the ability of those types of measures to bring about systemic change. They're certainly a step forward, but they won't solve any underlying issues. For instance, one of my favorite things to talk about with this is the Graham v. Connor decision by the Supreme Court, which was issued in 1989. This was a major step forward, or at least was presumed to be a major step forward in jurisprudence regulating police use of force. It created the reasonable officer standard that said would a reasonable officer feel that they were somehow threatened in the moment, and did that justify the use of force used in that instance, including up to lethal force. But as well-intended as that decision was, and it wound up getting co-opted and transformed. So now what was originally meant to be something that would address police use of force has actually been twisted and used to protect it. This is the decision that allows officers to, like, for example, in the case of Eric Gardner, it's one of the reasons why officers were not charged with anything, because they were able to argue under Graham v. Connor that in the explicit limited moment, which is all Graham v. Connor says that you were allowed to consider in these types of cases, in that very limited moment that force was used, could a reasonable officer feel justified in using force? You can't consider anything that happened before that moment or anything that happens after. But in that moment, whether it's reaching into a pocket or whatever, could that officer say that they were threatened? And that limitation of that particular rule has allowed officers to get away with quite a bit. A lot of police officers are trained specifically how to construct their stories in a way that conform to Graham v. Connor. And there are trainings that are offered about how to specifically frame a narrative in a way that allows an officer to be protected by Graham v. Connor. And so, as well-intended as that reform effort was, it ultimately wound up failing to do anything significantly about police violence. And we see these types of efforts happen. There's a great piece by Samuel Walker published in 2008 that details why police reforms fail. And there's a whole host of reasons. You have to get at the underlying issue. And one of the underlying issues is, quite frankly, police culture. Now, not all officers subscribe to police culture the same way, and it might look a little different among different departments. But if you don't deal with this underlying police culture, which may be adversarial towards other people, which may view themselves as a thin blue line between order and chaos, if you don't do something about that, reforms are going to have relatively muted effects.
We just got a question in from the chat. What about restrictions on certain types of funding and redirecting those to training, police officer training and things of that nature? Could that be of help?
I am also doubtful about that. We offer a whole host of trainings, and for every diversity training we offer, every use of force training, it doesn't seem to have the biggest impact. I am personally a little skeptical about the overall impact that training can have.
Okay.
If that underlying issue of police culture isn't dealt with.
Okay. So, and to address the underlying issue of police culture, perhaps we begin with understanding, what comprises the police culture or the culture of that particular department, and looking at who we bring into the department, right? And what isms or ideas that they may have about individuals in marginalized and underrepresented populations and things of that nature. Would you say that sounds reasonable?
Yeah, it absolutely starts from the bottom up in that way. It's about who you bring in, who is training them, what sort of milieu was established before those people came in. That's why you see some efforts going on about dismantling police departments, with the idea that if you break them apart, then you can hire new people who will represent what you want to represent. Whereas if you just bring in a good person into a bad department, that person may either be run out or corrupted by that particular culture. So it absolutely starts at the very beginning, from the ground up.
It's a nice segue. You talk about training. Our next panelist is Assistant Vice President for Policing and Chief of the Kansas State University Police Department, Mr. Ronnie Grice. And he is also a lead trainer for bias in policing in the state of Kansas. And I want to ask you first, when we think about some of the things that have happened, we got a number of questions in the chat about students and racism. Um, Many of us are very familiar that there has been at many institutions police called for students who were sleeping in dorm lobbies or taking a college tour or sitting in a classroom and doing absolutely nothing that was criminal or disruptive to the legitimate business of the university. Places like Colorado State University, Ball State University, and Yale University, particularly, have been reportedly having those challenges. What, if anything, in terms of strategies and initiatives, do you have in place to ensure that what has happened in some of these other institutions do not happen here? And I also want to ask you, Chief Grice, if you would talk a little bit about the diversity and makeup and trainings and et cetera of the Kansas State University Police Department.
First of all, I'd like to say good afternoon to everyone. And I'm going to kind of like lead into this, what Kevin just said, because Kevin did a good job of describing of bringing in the right person. When we talk about Kansas State University Police Department, we're talking about a unit of the university to, I feel, we did a very good job with hiring the right people and diversifying the department. As of today, when we discuss diversity, this department is made up of 4 African-American males, 2 Hispanics, 4 females, with one of the females is in a major leadership role. We have a transgender, and that's probably one of the biggest things that we strive for is diversity. Having the right person in your department is really crucial, especially when you're in any type of law enforcement environment. And one thing that we look at here within our department is the quality of the person that we bring on board within this department. A lot of the individuals that's with this department have served many years on a college campus. Most of the departments got degrees and some have masters, so they know how to operate within the university and college setting. As for training, our training coordinator is a graduate, and he does a great job of training and making sure that we have the right people in the right positions within the department. As we look at the assistant chief of this department, who's an Hispanic male who has been with this department for 24 years. Within this department, we have a lot of individuals who have served their country in the form of military. And those individuals come in with great leadership ability and have great leadership roles. So when we start talking about the department and diversifying and the training, and as being a member of the state of Kansas bias-based training for law enforcement within the state, I feel very privileged and honored to be able to serve on that committee and even have put our training video together. Within Kansas, it is mandatory that each officer has 40 hours of in-service training. But of all of the training, the one that is really mandatory for every law enforcement officer in the state of Kansas is bias-based policing. So when I talk about my department, I'm really proud of them. I'm proud of what we have accomplished in recruiting and getting the right individuals within the department. Now, when we talk about what happened at other universities, it goes back to kind of like what Kevin said. You've got to have the right person within your department. We respond to calls as they come in. It's not like we go looking for it. But if you got the right individual within your department, and when they respond to those type of calls, they know how to handle those in a manner where the individual is treated with courtesy and respect. It's an individual thing, and our officers thrive on their customer service here at this university.
Thank you, Chief Grice. When you think about the fact that universities are microcosms of the larger society, how does the K-State Police Department leverage their privilege and status to build community?
Well, I'm going to take this one phrase out and say it where it says leverage their privilege. We serve with dedication. We serve with integrity, and we serve with courage. So our officers are of the utmost outstanding ability within this university. We serve we have devoted our time to community-oriented policing. So we've had officers who have actually spent time into the community with training opportunities for different segments of the university. So we don't serve with privilege, we serve with honor.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to the stream of questions in the chat, and we will try to take these as they come in and are relevant and germane to the topic of Black Lives Matter and policing. The first question is, what is the plan to retrain campus police and reevaluate a relationship between Riley County Police Department and campus? And I guess we probably should think about this from, is there a need to, Chief Bryce?
I would put my department's training as second to none. Now, I think one thing we need to keep in mind is I cannot speak on other departments, but I can say with the new leadership under the Riley County Police Department, the working relationship has been outstanding over the last year and a half. As Kevin said, you can either start at the top or you can start at the bottom. And sometimes how your department functions starts with the leadership and it works its way down through the ranks, or it can start at the bottom. Right now, our relationship with Riley County, we've just signed a new MOU, Memorandum of Understanding with them that has allowed both departments to really concentrate on training together. And in my 26 years of being here, we now have members of the KSU Police Department who serve on the Riley County Special Reaction Team. In the past, we never would have seen that happen. We don't really, there's no disputes over jurisdiction. And if there is something that's out of jurisdiction, we have a procedure in place where we notify them and they either say, we'll send somebody or we'll work it. So, and Riley County and Manhattan is kind of unique. In most cities, you have a municipal police department, you have a sheriff's department, you have a university. We don't have that here. We have two police agencies, RCPD and KSU. So we have to work hand in hand. And we also have a local FBI office who we work with in partnership with. We also have a great relationship with Kansas Highway Patrol, because having a small department, I can tap into them for resources and manpower for special events and large events. So it is critical that all departments be able to function as a unit, because we depend on them, they depend on us.
Thank you. Our next question centers on observation of racist acts. It says, as students, if we observe racist actions being done by fellow K-State students, either on campus, in class, or in our dorm facilities, what is the best course of action to make change? And/or is there a system in place for reporting and addressing said events? I'm going to take the first stab at this, and Tremaine, may perhaps there's something that you may want to add. We have a designated office, the Office of Institutional Equity, that is charged with receiving and resolving such concerns, and any behavior that is done within the purview of our institutional policies, programs and activities and events that may be discriminatory would certainly be something that they should take a look at to determine what, if anything, needs to happen further. There is also an online apparatus called Reported, where you could go and share information anonymously through the Reported platform to help share that you have observed something that you think is in violation of a university policy, and it can be reviewed from there. as well. Tremaine, do you happen to have any other thoughts or ideas about this particular question?
Yep, Dr. Samuel, I'm going to echo what you said, but then also I want students to begin to think about bystander intervention as well, not necessarily to endanger yourself, but when we think about bystander intervention, a lot of times we attribute that to sexual assault. Bystander intervention, could be a plethora of things, and so if you are witnessing and you are observing certain things, it is okay to come to the defense and support that individual that's on that receiving end of the racial and discriminatory acts. But then I would also encourage you to, if it's a student-to-student interaction, talk to the faculty member if it's happening in the classroom, if it's happening within the dorms, talk to your residence hall director. You can always come to Diversity and Multicultural Student Affairs, and you can reach out to me or any of the other administrators within Diversity and Multicultural Student Affairs, because we serve as advocates for students. And so if there are instances and situations that we are not aware of, then it's very difficult for us to be able to address that. And so bringing that to our attention allows for us to be able to go to the proper authorities as well to tend to those situations.
If I could just intervene briefly, I know we have a lot of questions to get to. I just want to emphasize that, this question of what do we do when a racist event happens on campus we also need to ask the question, how do we create an atmosphere where we're not walking a minefield of having to encounter racism and the harms and that endure after you have to go there? Right. So while I totally appreciate there's an infrastructure for reporting, I also think that the question of what is the proactive work that can be done on the campus community, and as an ethnic studies faculty member in a very tiny unit where we're charged with teaching, this is a unit born from the kind of uprisings that we're living through right now. Black studies, Asian American studies, right, is born from this uprising. So my job is accountable to that movement. And so I just want to put out there, we're a very tiny unit. We don't, and so trainings are one thing, they're one time and they're finite, but there's also a way to invest in educational infrastructure that's deep and that actually teaches the histories of these, that offers a completely different set of lenses. So that's one way to do it. It's not the only way to do it, but I do want to put that out there, that we actually actively think of preventative strategies beyond just what we do after we experience this expectation of racism on campus.
Thank you. And as someone who teach in the department, specifically on the Black experience, I too appreciate your statement here and acknowledge that the American Ethnic Studies department, along with several other departments throughout the university, are the perfect place for gaining more information and enhancing your knowledge and understanding of these phenomena and issues to impact your daily lives. The next question says, as racism is deeply embedded into the culture of society, how is K-State aiding in changing the culture of both overt and covert racism that occurs on and off campus and in the Manhattan area? Well, I just got to say that we're doing a lot of things that will, in my estimation, help raise the collective consciousness of the Kansas State University community. I began with things like our Wildcat Dialogues, our Cats for Inclusion, certainly the KS Unite apparatus, which was born out of unrest, but has since evolved into topical sessions across the diversity and inclusion continuum, and will now be augmented even further to include professional diversity speakers here at K-State for the KS Unite event that will give us some of those sharper skills and tools to deal with issues of like racism and other inequities here in our environment. And we also must not forget that we are deep into the plans of developing and operating a multicultural center, which will be a place where the scholarship of departments such as American ethnic studies and gender and women's studies and other programs, sociology, social work, education, and the like, will meet the co-curricular experience of students and go out in a rippling fashion to, again, help raise the collective consciousness of the university community. And then we have adopted a university-wide theme for diversity and inclusion programs and activities for Kansas State University year-long. And this is a collaborative effort between housing and dining services, our Staley School of Leadership, our diversity point people in all the colleges, certainly our DMSA, the chief diversity officers, and several others throughout the university. If I didn't actually call your name or unit, please forgive me. But we've come together and we've had some very meaningful dialogues about how do we connect the work of things like the diversity summits that happens in the colleges, the teachings, KS Unite, the intercultural learning activities on one accord for the entire university community and make it a year-long thing. The CATS talk that we're having today is yet another example of how we will come together periodically and discuss any number of issues along the diversity and inclusion and social justice continuum. And our plan here is to hopefully have members of our cabinet and perhaps our deans to serve as moderators and explorers of these very important topics. In addition, my office is going to lead work with a group of students as well as faculty and staff from the Intercultural Learning Council, the presidential commissions, including religion, the status of women and multicultural affairs, and the chairs of each affinity group to comprise what we are calling a diversity advisory team, which will give us an institutional perspective on many issues that are taking place, and we'll incorporate that perspective into our thoughts about how to respond or how to act or what needs to happen as a result of issues that take place either locally throughout our state or our community, or even nationally or internationally as needed. So there's a lot of things that are happening. We're also doing focus groups at the moment with our student groups. We've had 2 or 3 this week, and those will conclude Friday from the University Climate Survey to better learn at a more granular level about some of the issues and concerns that students have about climate here at K-State. And we will continue that apparatus with employees beginning next week. And hopefully we'll be able to take all of that information and incorporate it into the work of the President's Commission on Multicultural Affairs, which is charged with creating a diversity and inclusion plan that is near ready for vetting at the university-wide level. So I could continue, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna stop here and go to our next question. It says, the next question says, some of our administrators, some of us are administrators. What specific actions are you going to take on behalf of Black students? What are you going to do besides KS Unite, and what changes are you making? And how will they be enforced? A lot of what I just talked about, I think, answers those questions. The concerns of discrimination have to go through a process. The complaint has to be received. There has to be enough information for our professionals in the Office of Institutional Equity to be able to review those matters and make some type of determination about moving forward and purview and things of that nature. And once they get to that level, they can investigate and determine what, if anything, has happened and what, if anything, needs to occur as a result of the investigation. So a lot of that we'll be taking a look at to determine if there are any changes needed or necessary or permissible at this time.
Dr. Sam, could I jump in that as well?
Please.
And one of the other things, specifically on my behalf, again, as I indicated before, is advocacy for our students. My charge and my responsibility within diversity and multicultural student affairs is to be able to support our students of color here at K-State. I can think of a number of occasions just this past year where having to advocate, consistently advocate for some students in regards to certain policies that were in place and certain practices that were being enforced in a discriminatory manner. And so those are things that within my area that we continue to do, continue to work hand in hand with our students to understand what are the challenges that you are facing, and then being an advocate, having a seat at that table to continue to push for policy reform, because really that's where it starts. And going back to that previous question about the culture, as an example that Kevin had given with the police force, is you can bring in a good person, and if they're coming into a corrupt system, one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to become corrupt or they're going to leave. And I think as we talk about systemic change, we have to get to a point where our culture is a culture that actively and intentionally does not allow for practices of racism on our college campus. And it has to be a culture to where when one has that belief, when one practices a racist lifestyle, that it is so uncomfortable for them. Now, granted, we don't want anyone to leave K-State. We want all students to be able to come here and feel like this is a place for them and that they can continue on their education. But we want it to be a place where all of our students feel a part of the campus and the culture. And we want the culture to be one that if you do practice a racist lifestyle, that our anti-racism is so strong at K-State that it does one of two things. It causes that individual student to change, or it causes that individual student to leave because K-State is not the place for them and their beliefs in that particular manner. But a lot of that has to come with policy reform and really challenging the practices of certain areas on campus. And so again, as an administrator within my area and an advocate for our students, it's continuing to push the envelope in those areas across campus.
Absolutely. I think we should certainly review policies where appropriate to see what, if anything, is perhaps unintentionally causing some negative impacts in the lives and perceptions and experiences of students. So we'll have an opportunity to work on that and review those things together. You will now be serving in two capacities that would help us in those regard. First, as the chair of the Black Faculty Staff Alliance, and secondly, as a member of the President's Commission on Multicultural Affairs. So I thank you for that input. One last question from the chat before we move on. The question says, does K-State plan to address the lack of Black faculty in every department at our university? One of the initiatives that I previously mentioned that we're working on through the President's Commission on Multicultural Affairs is the creation and deployment of a university-wide strategic diversity and inclusion plan. One of the things of that plan is certainly workforce diversity, and more specifically looking at our efforts to recruit and retain diverse faculty and staff at all levels. I will tell you that a review of the snapshot and the data going back to perhaps 2014 or 15, I'm forgetting exactly which, I don't have the data in front of me, shows that we've seen some degree of success in recruiting Black faculty to the university. Our challenge has been that of retention. So how do we work to ensure that we're not experiencing this revolving door phenomena, to where we bring individuals into our university community in faculty roles, but within a year or two or 5 years even, some of those individuals are no longer with us for any particular reason. And if they do leave, we need to have real good information about why they leave. Are they leaving because there's a family issue or something of that effect that requires them to relocate? Or are they leaving because they had a very negative experience or bad experience in the campus throughout the broader Manhattan community? Those are things that we can do something about. Those are things that we can address. And so we're certainly looking at that as a part of one of our 6 themes in the diversity and inclusion plan, which hopefully will be out for the campus to review mid-August, early September, or something to that effect. So we are running very, very short on time. We got about 15 minutes. I want to talk about action steps, right? What are some action items that individuals throughout our university community, or perhaps even the Manhattan community, can undertake to help deal with some of these issues, such as Black Lives Matter and policing and what have you? I want to begin with 2 very simple recommendations, and then I invite each of the panelists to share your thoughts. I believe it is very, very important, as shared by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Reginald Stewart, doing a TED Talk at Iowa State University. He talked about the importance of eradicating cultural illiteracy. And the way he summarized it is that, many people may come into their jobs and their college and university experiences not having a lot of connectivity and understanding about various cultures, right? And if their families and their communities did not explore other cultures, then they come with what they know. So if individuals are interested in and would pursue immersing themselves in other languages, arts, music, food, culture, ways of being, and things of that nature that are different from their very own, then perhaps they can arrive at this place where they no longer fear the unknown or are suspicious of individuals who have not given them a reason to be suspicious. The second thing is simply understanding that just because something hasn't happened to you or isn't a part of your everyday environment doesn't mean that it's not happening. And we see that everywhere today. We take a look at the epicenter of the current social movement in Black Lives Matter, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we know that these things did not happen in Manhattan, Kansas. They did not happen in other townships and cities across the country and the world, for that matter. But the rippling effect and the value and understanding of the importance of those issues is certainly present across the country and across the world. So, having said that, I invite my panelists here today to also offer any action items if you have them.
I encourage everyone to enroll in an American Ethnic Studies course and our Intercultural Competence Certificate, which is now available for all folks. I listed a number of Black feminist activist scholars that anyone can pick up and read, and I think that's an action item. Don't put it on Black students, Black faculty, staff. Well, Black faculty take our courses and learn from us, but don't put it on Black folks and folks of color, Indigenous folks to have to, sit there and explain it to you. There are resources that you can seek out and do to be proactive. And then the other thing I just want to put out there is there's a lot of performative solidarity with statements and saying, I've never seen so many corporations come out and say, we stand with our Black colleagues. But again, I forgot the name of the student who's on this panel with us. This is a brilliant student, Miss Brenda, I think, who said that don't just call me. It only is meaningful if you back it up with infrastructure and put your money where your mouth is when it comes to shifting the resources and that folks have access to really feel like you mean it. So.
Thank you.
Yes, I would like to say I encourage all of our students and faculty, don't hesitate to call on us. We provide a lot of services to the university. And I think one of the things is that just a lot of people on campus is just not aware of what we offer and the services that we provide. We have a great website that lists all of that. So do not hesitate to call us because we're here to serve you as the university community.
I would like to just advise that students, if they feel passionately about these things, to get involved in politics. Put your boots on the ground, make your voice heard, and particularly for the white students and faculty and staff and whoever else is listening, put action to
Yeah, I'm gonna challenge students to step out of your comfort zone, and go into the spaces, and learn, listen. As Shireen mentioned, we want to stop putting the weight on our students of color to be the ones that have to teach consistently when there are tons of resources that are out there and available. But step out of your comfort zone and really challenge yourself to learn and grow. If that's something that you are professing and proclaiming that you want to do. Again, echoing that there are plenty of resources available for you to do that. But then when opportunities present itself on campus, to really take advantage of those opportunities to advance. It's really easy to stay at your comfort level, but if you stay where you're comfortable, then you won't grow in those areas that you need to grow.
Brenda?
so
Oh, okay, hi. For me, some action steps I would recommend is like everyone else said, step out of your comfort zone, get out there, be a voice. Don't rely on your students of color or your friends of color to be your advocate and educate you on everything. We are not your saviors. You have to put in some effort and some work yourself so that way you can learn and help fix the situation or the problems that are occurring from these things. There's no excuse such as I didn't know or I never knew about this, because we have access to so much information and we can fact check that information as well. So that's my recommendation for students and for the administration. I recommend the same thing as well, but just like I said, put actions with those words, not just give us statements and we hear yous and we're so sorry, or we appreciate our students of color. We want to see change. We don't want to just hear about change that is going to happen. We need to see that change happen. So that is all I have to say. Thank you so much for having me.
Kevin?
Yes, sir.
I thought you were going to say something.
No, I was told apparently I froze up in the middle of my recommendation. So I just wanted to follow up and make sure people that heard that I said that this is really a call to make sure that white students, faculty, staff, and whoever else is listening are active allies and actively doing what they should to help further the cause, that this is not something that should be shouldered by our Black colleagues or other colleagues of color.
That's right. And I think the thing for this year's diversities programs and activities, difference makes us stronger, is an appropriate place for us to begin thinking and working on these particular issues. There are several questions we did not get an opportunity to entertain, and I will try to answer those questions if you'll email me at bsamuel1@ksu.edu, or you can email them particularly to a panelist if you like, in the interest of time, we're not going to be able to cover those. I would also like to inform everyone participating here today that we intend to offer our next community action talks on this subject of COVID-19 sometime in the month of July. Panelists to be determined, a moderator to be determined. So please be on the lookout. Please go to K-State Today regularly for announcements about COVID-19, the COVID-19 webpage, and the K-State Today regularly about things that are taking place on the campus and programs and activities and things of that nature that will help keep you informed about options and opportunities for getting involved and helping our university community be all that it can be. It has been my pleasure to speak with all of you and serve as moderator for this first Community Action Talks. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you have learned something, and I hope to see you at the next one. And with that, I give you all the gift of 5 minutes and hope that you will enjoy it. Thank you. Have a great day.